People don't want fracking. It won't take a penny off bills for the reason that I've set out. I don't believe some of the fantasies of Nigel Farage about the scale that we could produce from that. Why go for expensive, insecure fossil fuels when we can have homegrown clean energy that we control ourselves? Part of what we face in this debate, frankly, is people who are opposed to net zero wanting to jump on a bandwagon and say everything that we see is net zero's fault. The transition to clean energy is a massive economic opportunity, and we've got to manage that transition properly, and we take that obligation seriously. Don't listen to the people who want to use every difficult industrial situation to pursue what is essentially a culture war. I think that the right are engaged in an attempt to conjure up this sense that there is a mass revolt against clean energy. I actually think most of the British people do want us to take these opportunities that there are, and also to fulfil our responsibility.
Miliband, Secretary of State, thank you for coming on PoliticsJOE.
Welcome to my department.
It's really exciting to be here, actually.
Well, we
Some
love
heavy security.
I love PoliticsJOE, so it's fantastic.
It's very kind of you. So you're flying out to COP. You've gone for many years. Is it 20 years you've been going? Is that an overestimate?
Quite close to 20. I think the first one was 2008, so getting on for that.
Can you tell me why you go?
Because climate change is the biggest long-term issue we face, the climate crisis, and we can't tackle it on our own. We're 1% of global emissions, and therefore I think there's lots of reasons to act in the UK, and presumably we'll talk about those, but if we are going to make a difference, and the fate of future generations depends on these decisions, we've got to work with others. You know, so many countries, 190 something countries, go to these events, and they have been for 30 years. They've made a difference, and perhaps we'll get into that. So it's not like it's been going on for 30 years and nothing's happened. We have made a difference, but the reason to be in it, the reason to engage, is because climate change is a collective problem, and it requires a collective solution, and us working with others.
I think when people think about COP, they think about main players like, say, China, for example, who might have signed up to new obligations, but I think Joe Public would say that perhaps they're not doing their fair share. I mean, when you're in these meetings, when you're meeting with world leaders, do you think that everyone is on the same page, or is the UK really having to pull them towards meeting climate obligations?
I think everyone is on the same page in the sense that they all see in their own countries the impacts of climate change. And probably, you know, some of your viewers may or may not know this, but I did this job 15 years ago, and I think it's much more apparent to countries. Every country sees these effects of extreme weather in their own country. So it's like more apparent about why we need to act. The economics has moved in a better direction. So when I was doing this job way back when, you know, solar and wind will be the more expensive technologies. Now, for lots of countries, they're cheaper than fossil fuels. So it's not just the kind of environmentally right thing to do, it's the economically right thing to do for now. Now, every country faces its own constraints, but I think there is a real will to act. And just to give you a sort of sense of this for your viewers, because people might think, well, has it made a difference? When I was at a very ill-fated climate change summit, the Copenhagen summit in 2009. Back then, the world was heading for about 4 degrees of global warming. Now it's headed for something like 2.5. Now, 2.5 isn't good. Still not great. No, still not great, but better. Yeah. Back then, the term net zero wasn't even really invented, or at least not commonly used. Now, 80% of global GDP or you know, economic output is covered by countries that have a net zero target. So countries or states. So you know, and just on this point about the economics, last year we saw double the amount invested in clean energy compared to fossil fuels. So it's easy to think, and I was just with Keir actually, with some young people talking about these issues, it's easy to think, oh, you know, hide under the duvet, but actually the world is moving.
And it feels like there's tangible change then to be achieved.
Look, my big frustration is not enough tangible change, but we can't give up on it. And there's something about this, which is, I think we should just confront in this conversation, which is, okay, 194 countries flying in from around the world. Why is that a good idea? Okay, let me, because, why couldn't you do it on Zoom? Well, okay, this is a mechanism for accountability. This is saying to world leaders and governments, you're accountable for this in a global setting. A tiny state, a small state, Vanuatu or Jamaica, where we just recently seen the hurricane, they are in the same room as China or the UK, and so there is a sort of democratic element to this. Now, we could do it on Zoom, right? But I don't think it would be half as effective, because think about really complex negotiations. Think about something in your own life where you're trying to negotiate. Well, is it easier to do it on Zoom where people can sort of turn off the video and,
It's not great to be working from home.
Get on with their knitting.
Yeah.
Or are you realistically, in doing 194 dimensional chess, are you going to need people to be in the same room? At the Copenhagen Summit of 2009, it was going down the toilet, frankly, and I made an intervention right at the end to try and keep the show on the road, and we sort of kept the show on the road. I wouldn't have worked on Zoom.
Right. I mean, you look at a country like Libya, for example. You've just been talking about the extreme weather that we've seen in Jamaica, a devastating hurricane that's just taken over the Caribbean. Looking at Libya, they're suffering a drought. Their farming has been affected by extreme weather. A lot of people say this is down to climate change, but Libya don't want to sign up to many of the accords that are put down at COP. I mean, do you think there's going to be any convincing for countries like that who are now suffering the ramifications of climate change?
That's a really good question. Look, different countries are going to take different views, and that part of what we're trying to do here is we are trying to respect the democratic mandate of each state, including ours, but that's essential as part of this. But we're also trying to cooperate. Obviously, that's going to be complicated. I can't speak for Libya, but what I can say is when you look across the piece, and obviously some people will have in their minds the US and their position, by and large, the vast majority of countries think the climate crisis is a problem. We do need to tackle it. We do need to do our bit. Now, the negotiation is about what does doing our bit mean. And obviously, I want countries to do more. China, to be fair to China, is now got a target to actually cut its emissions for the first time ever. Not by 2060, which was their original net zero by 2060, or 2080, I think, but actually cutting their emissions. So kind of countries are moving. I want them to go further.
The problem is it can be a little bit house of cards, right? So, as you sort of briefly touched upon there, the White House and the US at large has a more positive view on fossil fuels than perhaps the Biden administration did, or the administrations that preceded any of the last two Trump administrations. They also seem to be rather reticent about net zero. And I suppose it's sort of spooking the public. It's spooking the US public, it's spooking the UK. If the US have a poor view of COP, do you think the whole thing could collapse? I mean, would China still want to meet its obligations if the US doesn't have to?
Well, look, I mean, China, India, and others are coming forward to the COP with their plans. I mean, now, as I say, I want China to be doing more. I want other countries to be doing more, and that's part of the reason to be at the table. But the headline, look, the US has to make its own choice. President Trump was duly elected by the American public. He has a mandate. But overall, the picture I would see is of countries saying, we're going to carry on working at this. We don't want to give up on this. We don't want to give up on this cooperation.
Mm. Let's bring that down domestically now. I'm going to read you something that Nigel Farage actually said this morning. So he's been giving a speech. He's been talking about the North Sea. Mm-hmm. Let's get the North Sea operating, he said. Let's have a look at some of the new onshore gas fields that have been found in this country that will produce tens of thousands of well-paid jobs. I mean, you're not fond of drilling in the North Sea. What is the argument?
I thought you were going to say I'm not fond of Nigel Farage. Look, here's the point about the North Sea. The North Sea is what they call a declining basin. Now, we've said we're going to keep existing oil and gas fields open for their lifetime. But we're not going to issue new licenses to explore new fields in the North Sea. Now, why is that? Because we both want to have a just transition in the North Sea to protect the workers there, and we want to make sure that we do the right thing environmentally, and I think we can do both. Now, what Nigel Farage sounds like he's talking about onshore is fracking, which your viewers will be familiar with. Fracking, and by the way, this is true of the oil and gas produced domestically also. It's really important to say this. It's sold on the world market, right? Why did energy bills go through the roof when Russia invaded Ukraine? They went through the roof because we were reliant on fossil fuels, and whether they came from domestically or came internationally, they were priced at the same level. So Russia invaded Ukraine, there was a massive shock in those markets, the prices went up, and the British people paid the price direct to the oil and gas companies. Homegrown clean energy offers something different because it offers a fixed price for wind or nuclear or solar where we get to control it. And so then on fracking, well, people don't want fracking. I mean, go around the country and suggest to the people, to the areas that want fracking, whether they want it. They say no. It won't take a penny off bills for the reason that I've set out. And frankly, I don't believe some of the fantasies of Nigel Farage about the scale that we could produce from that. And why go for expensive, insecure fossil fuels when we can have homegrown clean energy that we control ourselves?
So when he says that bills are going to get cheaper if you do grant these exploration licenses, is he lying?
He's just talking nonsense. He's just talking nonsense. And also, in a sense, to the viewers who are watching this and thinking, well, you know, Ed might say that, the last Conservative government said more North Sea production is not going to affect bills, not going to cut bills. That was what they said. Greg Hands, Kwasi Kwarteng, two previous Conservative ministers said that. Now, it's really important. The oil and gas is going to be with us for decades to come. We do want to make sure we have a just transition for those workers. By the way we do that is in the new technologies as well. Carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, offshore wind. Because under the last government, they lost 70,000 jobs in the North Sea because they didn't build that future for them.
What other projects are you embarking on? What can people expect to see over the next year or so?
I think it's so exciting this because we just unveiled our Clean Energy Jobs Plan, which essentially forecasts an extra 400,000 jobs in clean energy by 2030. So that's a doubling of clean energy jobs. And what jobs are they? We're building new nuclear at Sizewell C, 10,000 construction jobs, and jobs also running the nuclear power plant. Jobs in offshore wind, jobs in carbon capture and storage, net zero at Teesside. So the point is, for such a long time, people in this country have said, where are the good jobs of the future going to come from? And I had this experience the other day of going to Sheffield Forge Masters, which is a company in Sheffield, and just talking to the young people there about the opportunities that manufacturing for clean energy provided. You know, they feel they're building the future and doing so in a way that provides them with a living. And, you know, that's the point, I suppose. I feel like we're doing the right thing for future generations. And as I say, talking to young people this morning, they want us to act on this. But we're also about better lives today, good jobs, energy security and lower bills, cleaning up our air so we tackle air pollution. And I think we can do both of these things.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because I suppose you've got a brief that is a long-term brief, and we're not very good as a country actually in accepting long-termism. You know, is that a frustration for you when you're working in the department? I mean, you know, you talk about Sizewell C, the construction job. It's a long way off, isn't it? You know, you think back to that clip of Nick Clegg, quite an ill-fated clip of him now saying that it would take 10, 15 years to build it, so there's no point in bothering.
I don't know that clip, actually. Nick Clegg has a number of greatest hits. I mean, look, we are in the long-term business, and I think that really matters, but I suppose we're also in the better lives business now. When I meet people who are working in clean energy, they're saying, these are great jobs for now. when I think about Great British Energy that's put solar panels on the roofs of 250 schools, 250 hospitals, that's making a difference now to public services. It's releasing money from energy bills into frontline public services. And by the way, I think we're just in the foothills of what this clean energy revolution can achieve. Only 1 in 20, this is my current personal obsession, only 1 in 20 homes in the UK have solar panels on their roof. 1 in 20. In other countries, it's much more. One of the things we're working on is how can we help make it financially viable? And this is the thing I would underline. We're all about making it in people's financial interests to make the switch to clean energy. But there's no point in asking people to pay through the nose. People haven't got the money to do that. And so whether it's solar on rooftops or heat pumps or helping people with the batteries or insulation, it's finding ways in which we make this economically viable for people.
And that is sort of the push for heat pumps, right, and for people to get one in their home. But I just want to bring you back on to, transition into good, clean energy jobs.
Yeah.
I look at somewhere like Port Talbot, and I've reported from there multiple times, the botched sort of closure of Tata Steel that has left many people without a job. And there's a government promise to get those people back into work. Do you see them going into, say, a clean energy solution or a clean energy factory in that area? Is there going to be anything built there, or will they be retrained to something else?
One of the things that we're engaged in is investment in the port in Port Talbot, so it can be a centre for clean energy. There's huge opportunities in floating offshore wind, for example. So the answer is 100% yes.
That steel would have been good there for that offshore wind, no?
Indeed, but that's why the plans on the electric arc furnace are important. And look, our job is to make sure this transition is just. And I get that there'll be people who are really worried about the way the world is changing and what is it going to mean for them. And we totally accept, whether it's in the North Sea or elsewhere, our obligation, and this is what I take so seriously as part of a Labour government, our obligation to make that work for people. But what I know in my heart of hearts is, I just think about my constituency in Doncaster, ex-mining constituency. Lots of people voted for Brexit there, almost 10 years ago now. And so many people said the same thing to me, which is, we're voting for a better future for our kids and grandkids. Now, what they meant by that was, we felt like we used to have good jobs here, good jobs that paid a decent living. And that is, if you like, the kind of unanswered question that so many people in our country have had. And there is this answer staring us in the face. And we've got to seize that answer. And certainly China's seizing that answer. India wants to seize that answer. Why shouldn't we?
Do you think it's the scale or the speed of the transition that leaves towns left behind? I mean, you look at somewhere like Grangemouth, for example, that oil refinery is closing, but there isn't something in the immediate that is reopening. So you're always going to have this sort of 5-year period where people may be unemployed.
But to be fair, I think people want to blame that on net zero. It's not about net zero. It was about a refinery that had long-term economic problems. And in a sense, look, I think part of what we face in this debate, frankly, is people who are opposed to net zero wanting to jump on a bandwagon and say everything that we see is net zero's fault. My strong view is that the transition to clean energy is a massive economic opportunity, and we've got to manage that transition properly, and we take that obligation seriously. But don't listen to the people who want to use every difficult industrial situation to pursue what is essentially a culture war.
So do you think you can pull those voters back from Nigel Farage? Because it's fair to say, he's sort of speeding ahead with this narrative that net zero is costing the ordinary person money.
Well, he's certainly saying that. But what lots of the people that I talk to say, who look at public opinion, is, and I think this is part of his tactic, he wants to create more of a sense of a backlash than there is. Look, what most of the British people believe, what according to all of the opinion polling that I've seen, is the right thing to do is to make this clean energy transition. They believe that renewables are likely to give us greater energy security and lower bills than fossil fuels. They see the opportunities. They want the transition done in a way that is consistent with them, with the cost of living pressures that they are facing, and that is absolutely our commitment. But I sort of think I think that the right are engaged in an attempt to conjure up this sense that there is a mass revolt against clean energy. I actually think most of the British people do want us to take these opportunities that there are, and also to fulfil our responsibilities. I mean, look, Nigel Farage said, let's reopen the coal mines. I'll be honest, I'm an MP from a ex-mining constituency. People in my constituency aren't saying reopen the coal mines. People in my constituency are saying, get us the good jobs of the future. And the way to do that is with clean energy.
Well, in fairness as well, he also said refire up the blast furnace, which isn't possible. And they'll tell you that, if you go to Scunthorpe. The other thing actually that he attacked was the windfall tax that is still on oil and gas companies. It's around 78%. Do you think that's still justifiable?
I think it was right to put the windfall tax into place. I know better than to speculate about tax matters. Those are very much firmly a matter for Rachel Reeves. Look, what she will, I'm sure, ensure is that we strike the right balance between making sure we tax the unearned profits of the oil and gas companies, which is why the windfall tax was brought in, and also making sure that the decisions she makes are consistent with investment in the future. And that's what I'm sure she'll be looking at. And there's a consultation going on about that.
Is it an achievement, though, to get that windfall tax onto the oil and gas companies?
It was the right thing 100% it was the right thing to do. Because we saw them making these huge profits. And I remember at the time, when we proposed it was controversial. The then Conservative government said it shouldn't have happened. I'm sure Nigel Farage opposed it all the way along. But it was the right thing to do, partly to raise money to help provide support for people in very, very difficult circumstances facing the soaring energy bills.
Let's pull it back to COP, just sort of the last little bit here. What's on the agenda? When you get there, what are you going to be pushing for?
Greater ambition, because as we said earlier in this interview, we need all countries to step up. The UK has shown real leadership on this. We want others to provide that leadership. And by the way, us setting the power of example does make a difference. I passed the Climate Change Act in 2008. More than 60 countries passed their own version of the Climate Change Act. Theresa May put net zero into law in 2019, and now many, many other countries followed. So, I think Reform have a shriveled view of British leadership. We can make a difference. We may be only 1% of emissions, but we can make a difference. So first of all, moving faster. Secondly, finance, including for developing countries. Last year, we agreed the public finance goals. This year is about the private finance, because if we can get the private finance flowing to those countries, we make a difference. And thirdly, forest. This is a COP in the forest, in Belém, in the Amazon. And part of what this COP is about, and what's so important about this is, deforestation, in terms of what the impact on emissions, is a massive threat. Also, it's a threat to the livelihoods of the indigenous people who live in the forests. And so one of the big focuses of this COP is how we can work together to protect the forests. Those are the details of what COP is going to be about. I think there is something else, though, which is, I don't quite know how to put this, but we can't go it alone as countries in this world. There are too many problems that cross borders. And there's no problem that is more a collective global problem than the climate crisis. We can sort of sink or swim on our own, and we'll sink. Some countries literally, actually, will disappear. Or we can choose to work together to solve this problem. And I actually think that despite all of the negativity and the wish to cast despair, actually this process of working together for 30 years, this mechanism of accountability and action has made a difference, and we have to keep pushing at it. And just speaking personally about this, I think about my kids who are 16 and 14, about to be 15. And, I think they'll think to themselves, in 10 years' time, they won't be saying, why was my dad going on about climate? That was a passing fad. They're more likely to be saying, why the hell weren't they doing more? Why the hell weren't they more engaged? Why the hell wasn't it at the top of every agenda every day in politics? And in 20 years' time, that will be even more true, because it will be future generations which will live with this. And that's why it's our duty to do absolutely everything we can. And that's one of the reasons I'm still in politics. I lost the election in 2015. I could have gone off and done what others have done, but I decided
be a consultant.
Being a consultant, I'm not sure anyone would have had me, but I decided to stay, and I stayed because of the two great causes I care about, which is the climate crisis and the inequality, which threatens our world, frankly, and our country, and the crisis of inequality. And I actually think both come together in this agenda that we're pursuing, and so this really matters, and I think people will judge us.
I agree. Miliband, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Have a great COP.
Thank you.